From native son of San Mateo County to the halls of Congress, Congressman Kevin Mullin is our guest. The game is politics. The game is on.
I'm Bob Marks.
I'm Mark Simon. Welcome back to the game, our podcast. We're happy to be doing this. We have as our guest here, as I mentioned at the open, a native son of South San Francisco, son of a legendary political science teacher and elected official, former legislative aide, former Assembly Speaker pro tem, and now member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin Mullin. Thank you for joining us here. It's happy to see you.
Wonderful to be on the inaugural reboot, I guess we could say, of the game. Thrilled to be with you guys.
We hope to get positive feedback from our viewer.
Yes.
Let's plunge right into the presidential race. I know you obviously have endorsed Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. A lot of conversation is focused on democracy is at stake, the future of our country. Do you think that's the case, and why is that so, if it is the case?
Well, I think all of the indications are that the former president, President Trump, if he were to resume the presidency, would do anything in his power to undermine voting rights, to undermine representative democracy, empower appointees, executive level appointees, empower the judiciary, non-elected officials. So there is an autocratic movement that I think the former president represents. I think it is a threat, a clear and present danger to our democracy. I mean, this is somebody who was an election denier, who pushes out misinformation on a regular basis, has really created a MAGA movement in this country where misinformation and sort of the right-wing media ecosystem are driving so much of the conversation on the right. And you see a lot of extremism, unfortunately, play out here on Capitol Hill, where I'm sitting at the moment in the Longworth building here. We have a House Republican majority that unfortunately is being driven by some of the extremist forces on the conservative right. The former president has talked about Project 2025. He's distanced himself from Project 2025, but it is a laundry list of far-right proposals which would take away freedoms, take away some basic protections for people in this country. And it's a dangerous ideology that the former president is pushing. So I'm a pretty, I guess I'm a small c conservative when it comes to my rhetoric. I try to keep things sort of on the level and not overstate things. I feel in my bones that there's a danger to the republic if the former president were to get back into office. And I wouldn't be shocked if he ran for a third term should he be elected. There are no guardrails when it comes to the former president. I think that's what presents the biggest danger. I still find it shocking that he is where he is in the polls, and it is a neck and neck race. Even as we sit here today, as we're taping this, we have a huge debate tonight, which could very well set the trajectory for the rest of the campaign. So we're waiting with anticipation, and I think Kamala Harris is going to do very well tonight.
As a member of Congress, a Democrat in Congress, from the outside, we see just tremendous extremism, that's out there. Tell us, have you been able to work with people across the aisle? Have you found Republicans that you can work on legislation with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is more bipartisanship than people realize. It just doesn't get the attention from the media. The media does love the partisan combat. It creates, there's conflict and controversy, and that sort of drives the narrative and drives clicks, so to speak. But there are a lot of day-to-day kinds of activities in a bipartisan way. I have reached out to some of my California Republican colleagues, just in particular, Jay Obernolte, Vince Fong, who's new to the building. He won in a special election. These are people I served with in the California State Assembly, who I've worked with before, who I know are good people, and I'd like to work with them. It's sort of baby steps, but I'm hosting Jay Obernolte. He's a Republican from Big Bear, very red part of California. I'm hosting him in my district to show off our life sciences, our innovation economy. He and I serve on the science committee together. And he's a believer in science, is really interested in what we have going on in San Mateo County in terms of our life sciences and our tech industry. And so I'm going to host him and his wife for a few days, and then he's going to return the favor. I'm going to visit Big Bear and learn about a rural, exurban part of California. So those are baby steps, right? But I think there's a lot that can be done with just the California delegation working across a party aisle. There used to be a series of meetings involving the California delegation, both parties. Now we meet as a California Democratic caucus, and I believe the California Republicans do the same. But we need to be promoting work across the aisle, and to that end, the aforementioned Jay Obernolte hosts some dinners at his townhome here in Washington, D.C. with members of both parties in the California delegation, really just to rebuild, I guess you could say, relationships, which is absolutely necessary. But my hope is that some of the extreme forces can be marginalized, and we can sort of rebuild something of a politics of the common good. That may be a little, maybe too much to hope for in the short run, but we have to start somewhere in terms of rebuilding that. And it will probably be in a post-Trump era where, my hope is that a traditional Republican Party can be re-empowered, because we need a governing partner. As a Democrat from a pretty progressive part of the country, we need a counterweight, but a legitimate traditional Republican Party to work with. What this MAGA Freedom Caucus movement is, it's frankly too extreme. There's no interest in governing in that Freedom Caucus, and we're in the business of government back here. And if you have a faction that's not interested in governing, it makes it very difficult when you're running the government. So I'm hoping that there are brighter days ahead with the Harris administration and a Democratic Congress. No matter how you look at it, there's going to be a narrow majority. Either we have a narrow majority, or the Republicans maintain a narrow majority. And I'm hoping that can force some cooperation to move forward on some of the biggest challenges we have. And there are plenty.
I keep reading stories, citing unnamed sources and even members of Congress who say in private conversations, quite a number of the Republicans agree that a lot of what's going on in the hardline caucus is nuts and not very constructive. Has that been your experience? Are you hearing from colleagues, look, I can't say anything publicly, but I think you're doing fine, and I support what you're doing. I just can't tell anybody.
That certainly exists. Now, there are some sort of true believers, if you will, in the Freedom Caucus who are absolute, ideologues when it comes to that. There's a big swath, though, I would argue, and candidly, I'm not sitting in these Republican caucus meetings, and most of my time is spent with fellow Democrats. But my sense of it is, at least, that there are some practical political considerations at play, that if you buck Donald Trump, he may turn his fire on you as a Republican, and you could face a primary challenge, probably from your right. So there's a fear factor that is palpable that I think prevents Republicans from even showing up in photos in some cases with Democrats. I mean, that's how sort of extreme some of the forces are. And I got to tell you, I actually have I sort of feel a little bit for these individuals because they're getting hammered from a right-wing media ecosystem where there's a lot of misinformation out there. And if they venture across the aisle and appear to be working with Democrats, they could be ostracized. I mean, that is just no way to run a party. So there are some real sort of toxic elements within the Republican caucus. Not that we are perfect over here on the Democratic side. We've got our problems too. But in the main, the folks that I encounter on my side of the aisle are interested in making the government work. And I just, you see a lot of demagoguery at play in the Republican caucus, and they control the gavels. They run the show. And it's been a real adjustment for me, right? Coming from Democratic supermajority Sacramento and in the leadership where we were really in the business of governing and moving legislation and working the budget to help our districts. It's been a lot of voting no for my freshman term in the minority party. And it's also been an adjustment as somebody low on the seniority ranking as a freshman. That too has been an adjustment. It's all part of learning a new job, like any new job. It's been quite an adventure here this past almost 2 years now.
Speaking of, essentially what you're talking about, we have the specter of potentially a government shutdown, another standoff the end of September. What's your sense about that, and how do you see it playing out?
Well, it's a very timely question, Bob. I mean, even as we speak today, we're trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing on the Republican side of the aisle. There's discussion around a CR, a continuing resolution, which essentially would keep spending levels the same either through the end of the year or possibly through March. One of the issues in play here are the Republican leadership have been pushing something which would require citizenship documentation in order to register to vote or cast a vote, even vote by mail, which would create a tremendous burden for elections officials. It's all sort of this, fallacy around non-citizen voting, which is not legal. And as this goes back to the conversations around election integrity, and I'm going to put that in quotes, election integrity, essentially inventing instances of fraud that are simply non-existent. If there is election fraud, it is minuscule, and it is pursued. But the sense that there's widespread voting fraud is just a fallacy, and I think meant to drive anger, meant to drive sort of outrage, and meant to motivate voters as opposed to an actual substantive issue that needs to be dealt with. So I hesitate to make any predictions or I hesitate on prognostication given my freshman status here. I haven't been through enough of these budget fights to sort of predict what's going to happen. I would say just sort of common sense would dictate that we're going to get some kind of a continual resolution, because I think members in purple seats that need to really go home and campaign aggressively want to leave Washington and go back to their districts to campaign. So that's actually going to force some kind of action in the next couple of weeks. We're supposed to be here for the next 3 weeks. I think they may shave off that last week. It's really interesting. Taking this in a little bit of a different direction, but the fiscal year runs from October 1 to September 30. And we're back here in Washington. We're in September here. I sort of think that I suspect that in the old days, when election day really was the election was held on election day. Now we have sort of election month with all the voting by mail, that the calendar is sort of attuned to, coming back here, finishing business before the fiscal year, and then going home for October to campaign before the November election. In reality, as we all know, ballots are going to be going out here shortly. We've really extended the voting process. So I think there's candidates who are in really close races are anxious to get back home and campaign before the ballots actually drop that very first week of October. So it's interesting. We're sort of dealing with a little bit of an antiquated calendar that's not fully in tune to sort of the way we run elections now. But big picture, we have very little cooperation, unfortunately, with this Republican majority on spending, that essentially the fights get sort of rolled over. And if it gets rolled over to March, for example, well, it could be, it will be a new president dealing with that March situation. And it actually would take some of the power away from the new president in a way. That's why there's a conversation around maybe there's a CR to the end of the year and allows the new president, upon taking office, to sort of put their budget plan together. So lots of different balls in the air, and we'll see what the next week brings.
Speaking of early voting, looks like we're going to start voting in Pennsylvania next Monday, the 16th. Is that just too early? It was even going to be earlier with North Carolina, but they're tied up over a dispute with Robert Kennedy Jr. Aren't we getting too far away from the election with early voting?
Well, you're talking to a guy who is like Mr. Vote by Mail. Was always touting the work of Warren Slocum and others.
It's all your fault, Kevin. Yes.
Throw me under the bus here on the inaugural reboot show. So it does feel a little early. It's like a lot of things in this world I operate in. It's about finding a balance. What is sort of a common sense approach? You want to open up the process, right? You want to make voting as accessible as possible. But it is interesting that votes are going to be cast while, a second debate between the two candidates will still happen. And a lot is going to occur between now and election day. So you want voters to have the benefit of information, as much information as possible about the candidates. It's created a real crush, right, for Kamala Harris, who sort of assumed the nomination in a way. The reality is that was, she moved very, very quickly to secure the nomination once President Biden dropped out of the race. They are just sprinting right now, not only preparing for the debate, but just the mechanics of running a really aggressive campaign in I'd say the roughly 7 swing states that will decide the election. So it's created a real calendar challenge for the Democrats. I always, we geared much of our efforts in California to roughly a month out. There was no requirement that it be only a month out, but just the practical reality for the registrars in the 58 counties was, the 30-day was sort of the rough mark when ballots would be out there. And I think that's a reasonable amount of time for people to get their ballots. They probably have enough information at that point to at least cast an informed ballot. But it does seem a little early, candidly, a September date. But as we know, these are decentralized elections, right? So states set their own rules, and then the counties actually administer the election. So it's a very interesting patchwork out there.
I do think vote by mail has really helped down the ballot. When you have school board, you have city councils, and you have a chance. I mean, I have to confess, when I was voting in a voting booth, I'd walk in and there were some races I had no idea what to do, but I have a chance to look people up. So that's a plus. In our pregame prep, Bob posed a good question, though, which is, it takes a long time to count these ballots. And I worry that it doesn't help the integrity of the election when it just takes so long, that it fuels any suspicions people might have about skullduggery. But also, it's just, you shouldn't have to wait 3 weeks to find out who won. And some races aren't that close, but some of them are, and are likely to be that way for a while, given that some of the divisiveness you see at the national level is starting to manifest itself locally. Is there anything that can be done to speed up the process and add a little more certainty to the timing of this?
Yeah, just by the way, we've got the horn going off. It's like the horn in a high school basketball gym telling me that
Does that mean you're supposed to go vote now?
votes will be in about a half an hour or so.
Okay.
So they're just giving us an early warning here. But to the question about the counting of ballots, I have always been a little flummoxed actually at the amount of time it takes, and I never was really. I never really understood why the updates only came every few days when you have these really close races. I mean, you're talking about a daily check. You want to know, like, day to day what the how an election is trending. It's probably a better question for Mark Church, our registrar, and other registrars who actually have to deal with this. It's easy, sort of from the outside looking in, to question it. And I know it's about signature verification, and there's all sorts of things that we have done at the state level to encourage the counting, encourage the inclusion of ballots, right? So, there's one year there was 20,000 ballots statewide that got tossed out. Many of those are probably legitimate votes, but they were tossed out for signature verification reasons where the signatures didn't match. We've opened up that process to make it easier to count legitimate ballots, but that has created a time challenge, and that slows the process down. Nonetheless, I don't understand why we couldn't sort of surge the workforce at that particular time to really speed that process of counting ballots. And there's the 30-day certification post-election, but when you're talking about a really close race, it shouldn't take 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks to find out who won. So I think that probably gets back to a resource question and how to surge elections workers in these county registrars' offices. And if I was still in the legislature, I might try to do something about that, because those are funded through the state budget, those offices, and with help from the county, of course. But it is, I think it raises some questions. We sort of point to it as, hey, every vote counts, every vote matters. We're taking the care with it. But I do think we could definitely speed that process in 2024.
Yeah, it certainly feeds into the skepticism that voters have, not just Trump supporters, but voters in general. I think the longer it goes, the more uncomfortable people get, the more they question whether it's, the count is valid.
Yeah.
Let me switch back to the presidential race. Kamala Harris is a California Attorney General, California U.S. Senator, San Francisco District Attorney. How well do you know her? What are your impressions of her? I know when she's flown back to California and come to the Bay Area, you often either met her or even been with her. Tell us your impressions of her.
I've always been impressed with Kamala. It is a little surreal, I have to say, as somebody who knew Kamala when she was the DA. And I'm trying to recall, I may have known her before she was the DA, and she was active in Democratic circles. But she really came to prominence when she was elected district attorney. I do know, sort of anecdotally, that she has always been very ambitious. And you absolutely need to be ambitious if you're talking about running for the U.S. Senate and ultimately become the vice president and hopefully our next president. Frankly, it's a little bit of a source of pride, actually, that a San Francisco Bay Area Democrat is poised to become the president. And I have to say, just selfishly, it would change the nature of my job. To have somebody that I know in the Oval Office. I was actually an early endorser of Kamala's when she ran for president, along with a number of state legislators at the time. When she dropped out, I very quickly threw my endorsement to Joe Biden, and was actually one of only a handful, actually, at that time that had endorsed Joe Biden. and I was with him on Super Tuesday, and I was one of the folks that helped move our primary up to Super Tuesday, and was with him when essentially on that day, and he wound up sort of locking up the nomination that day. But he doesn't know me in any meaningful way, other than he said, "Hey, I'm never going to forget you, man." And I think he probably quickly forgot me after that. But I actually know Kamala, and when I was in the state legislature, she would come as the attorney general and visit with our caucus, and we had some informal caucus dinners together. So, look, man, I'm thrilled that she is where she is. It's probably a coin flip, right? But she's got 50% chance, I'd say, probably at this point, to become the next president of the United States. And it is, it's a little bit of a surreal feeling, having seen her ascend the way she has, but just the enormous opportunity it would present for those of us in California to have one of our own, a daughter of California, occupy the highest office in the land. She'd be the first California Democrat to occupy the highest office in the land. So it would be, I think, it would unleash a great deal of optimism and enthusiasm among our California delegation here, at least on the Democratic side, to have one of our own in the Oval Office that we could actually program with and partner with. And, having somebody who understands the challenges, unique set of challenges we have in California around affordability and housing issues. And I'm glad that she's raised that issue in her nationally televised remarks, the issues that are so important in California. So I think she's going to win. I just said I'm going to be cautious about my predictions, but I do think at the end of the day, this election is going to be about moving the country forward versus going backwards. And I just like the differentiation. I like the way the election is framed right now, that there's one candidate that very much represents the way America looks now and will look in the future versus going in reverse. So,
okay. So you said she was ambitious, and I think we all agree we're not offended by ambition. Somebody has to run for these offices, and it's not like somebody's going to reach out with a long arm and tap one of us on the shoulder.
Yeah.
What are the characteristics? Because one of the issues has been that she's still not well defined in the minds of the American public. This debate that we're recording this ahead of the debate, but that will probably go a long way in terms of giving us a sense of her. But is she smart? Because Trump says she's not. Is she thoughtful? Is there an example you can give us of something she did and you thought, wow, she's really got a lot going on?
Well, the intelligence is apparent right away. She is, I think, a prosecutor by nature, which I think has presented a little bit of an interesting challenge for her. Being a prosecutor, working effectively in a courtroom, or even serving as the chief law enforcement officer for the state as attorney general, that the sort of language you use and the messaging maybe doesn't always translate at a campaign level. It's an interesting sort of balancing act for her, I think. And I think she's had to sort of shift a little bit as she's run for president in terms of her broader messaging, but she was an effective attorney general in terms of getting some of the settlements for homeowners. But look, she's a political animal. I think she has always had her eye on moving up the ladder, but she wouldn't be where she is if she weren't effective at every stop along the political road. And she showed her chops in the U.S. Senate during the confirmation hearings with the Supreme Court justices. I think a lot of eyebrows were raised at how effectively she was communicating and sort of conveying the seriousness of the situation. And as vice president, I think I was a little dismayed at a sense that she wasn't out front enough. I mean, I think she's a really effective communicator and presence, and just embodies something so very different than President Biden. I was just sort of surprised that she wasn't out front more during the President Biden's term here. I think she has now emerged, of course. But for the first couple of years, I think for whatever reason, and I have no inside information on this, they didn't put her in a position to really be out there and be a face for the administration to their detriment. And I think she obviously is the face of the Democratic Party now, and I think she's going to be successful in November. And like every job at each level, she has grown into that job. But just think about this resume she has. She is exceptionally qualified to be the president. And she's running against somebody who, before becoming president, had not served in any elective office in any elected capacity. And frankly, will not find success if he points voters to his 4 years in office. It may appeal to some folks on the far right, but I don't think it's going to appeal to swing voters. And look, this election is going to be decided by maybe 40 to 50,000 voters across 6 or 7 states. That's what this is going to come down to. And I'm hopeful and expect that those swing voters will want to move the country forward, as opposed to going back to the rancor and anger of the Trump years.
Yeah, that's an important point you make, I think, which is that you don't just show up at the national stage ready to go. It's a rare individual. And I think 4 years ago, Kamala Harris was not ready. And the evidence to that, to me, is J.D. Vance, who clearly is not ready for the level he's operating at. So it's significant. I think you make a significant point, which is that you do have to grow into the job. Even the vice presidency is a job you have to grow into, where your only official duty is preside over the Senate and get up in the morning and ask how the president is feeling. Bob.
Yeah, Kevin, you have 2 young sons. They certainly have gotten an education, the ways of Washington and Sacramento. Talk about the challenges of raising a young family, being a member of Congress, particularly from California, where you literally have to fly across the country to go to work.
Yeah, Bob, thank you for that. And that is candidly the hardest part of this job, is the travel, almost weekly. Although I have to say I was home for the last 5 weeks during our summer recess. We weren't off. It wasn't a vacation, but I was at least sleeping in my own bed in South San Francisco every night. With the exception of the convention in Chicago, I was there for a couple nights. But for the most part, when we are in session, I am flying 3 weeks out of the month. And I'm gone for the most part, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and I fly home Thursday. So there's 3 nights when I'm back in Washington, D.C. And thank goodness for FaceTime. I can actually see my boys before they go to bed, check in on the day. But just physically being away from my family is certainly challenging. And the travel, I joke around a little bit. I know why the Giants have trouble traveling to the East Coast. That or they're just not very good. But the Warriors have I think they travel more than any other NBA team. When you add it all up, they're coming from the West Coast, from the edge of the continent, flying all over the country. And I've come to sort of, I think, just sort of deal with the jet lag on a weekly basis. I think my body is in 2 different time settings. I mean, I'll be waking up at 3 a.m. when I'm home in South City. Minor problems, first world problems for a Congress member, and they don't really qualify as real problems, but it's kind of the weekly grind of flying back and forth from California to Washington, D.C. And I certainly knew what I was getting into. It's just a lot easier to drive to Sacramento and drive home on a daily basis than to do the flying. But it is an opportunity to get some reading done or some napping done on the plane. And they know me on Alaska by now, by name. So, but it's just a great honor to represent the peninsula back here when I approach that big white building and know that I am representing the 762,000 people of the 15th district. It's a reminder, the responsibility that I have on behalf of my constituents. And I have made, I think, a concerted effort to stay rooted in San Mateo County. You know, there are a number of members that live back here. They represent a district wherever their home state is, and they will go visit that district, but they don't actually live there. I actually live in South San Francisco and will for the foreseeable future until I reside in Colma. But it is a great, what an opportunity. Even with the craziness and the extremism and the chaos from time to time, there are still an enormous opportunity every single day to do something on behalf of your district. And that's most certainly what keeps me going, keeps me getting on the plane.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Kevin, I know I speak for Bob and our producer, Frank Bravo. We're lucky to have you in Congress. You're serious. You're a real student of politics and political science. And we're glad to see that your co-hosting duties on the game didn't seriously damage your political career.
Can I get like an occasional like commentating gig here on the new reboot?
Yeah.
You know,
yes,
okay.
Absolutely. We'll get that done. You know, and for those of us whose careers have already peaked, we're always proud of you and admire you. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for your time. We know even for all the issues that are going on around you, this is a busy time, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And that is another edition of The Game. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again soon when the game comes around.